everyone. So this is going to be me working through the third free response question that you encountered on your mock exam. And so I reproduced it here for, I think I left out C because I'll just talk about C generally. But I reproduced it here in kind of my own words to, obviously for ease of production, or ease of, so it can fit here. So in the small country of Zootopia, I didn't want to go back and read what country they gave you. Equilibrium P of wheat is $10 per bushel. Wheat is produced in a competitive industry, so that's important, at a perfectly competitive industry. And the world market P is $20 per bushel. And then assume autarky. It actually just tells you to assume that they don't engage in international trade. But I wanted to reintroduce this vocabulary term of autarky because you might encounter it in your microeconomics exam. It just means a country that doesn't engage in trade with other countries. So assume autarky has that root word auto. Draw a market for wheat with equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and domestic producer surplus. So this is pretty simple. Let me see if I can angle you more this way. So this is more convenient. I don't know why. Right, so it's a simple supply and demand graph, and we're going to label this domestic wheat market, and then price on the y-axis. This is probably the easiest FRQ, FRQ3. FRQ1 was probably the hardest FRQ, and the second one was probably intermediate. And then, so like the world price of wheat doesn't matter, right? We're engaged in autarky, so our equilibrium price is going to be $10. And then this Q star, I can label this P star, is going to represent the amount that we're going to produce. And then I think it asks us to draw producer surplus, right? We've drawn this so many times. It's everything above the supply curve and beneath the price. I'm going to label this in orange, right? So on the exam, you would just shade it in or draw like a sort of pattern, right? Whatever you want to do. Get out however creative you want and label that. This will be producer surplus, and then we're done with part A. And then it says assume international trade, right? And this is where, and it wants you to label the world price, what's the quantity of wheat supplied by domestic producers, QP, and domestic consumer surplus after trade. And so the world price is going to be higher than the P star, right? And this is actually going to be to the benefit of, it's going to be P world, which is going to be $20, I think, yeah, $20 per bushel. This is obviously going to be the benefit of producers, right? And so it wants us to think about the quantity of wheat supplied by domestic producers and put it as QP, I think, yes. So we look at this new price, and QP is going to represent the quantity of wheat supplied by domestic producers. This is going to represent, should I label it as QC? Yeah, why not? This is going to be the quantity of wheat demanded by domestic consumers now because of the higher price. Right, effectively with the world price, producers are like, oh yeah, this is awesome, right? Because if they're a perfectly competitive industry with little influence over the price and they're price takers, at the world price, they're going to obviously supply, their wheat at the world price because it's a higher price than the domestic price. And so this is going to allow them to export. They're going to engage in exports. If the world price is higher than the equilibrium domestic price, then the producers of that market are going to engage in exports. This is obviously going to negatively impact consumer surplus, right? Before, consumer surplus used to be everything above the price point and below the demand curve. Now, of course, the price point is higher, so this would be the new consumer surplus. And the new producer surplus is everything below the price point and above the supply curve. And I also want to bring our attention to something. If this were a binding price floor, then this would reflect a gap, right? We wouldn't be in equilibrium, right? This would reflect a gap, right? Essentially, a shortage, or I'm sorry, a surplus, but because there's going to be surplus goods in this market, you're going to export that surplus, right? So this is going to reflect, this gap is going to reflect exports, right? Which you would expect to happen. And so there really isn't any deadweight loss in this model. There's just a loss in consumer surplus, obviously, because it shrinks from this triangle to this little area right here. And producer surplus gains significantly. And so that's our international trade market. Or that's our domestic wheat market as it engages in international trade. So that's how we would show it. Okay, so I hope it wasn't too difficult. Let me get a better angle for you guys. But it was a pretty easy example.